You're listening to Eating for Eden, episode 41. When it comes to doing something about climate change, your food choices matter. Thanks for tuning in to Eating for Eden, a podcast that takes a food-first approach to climate action. I'm your host, Jessica J. Schroeder, and I am passionate about food that tastes good and does good. I'll guide you with practical tips and help you thoroughly enjoy your food along the way. Welcome to Eating for Eden, and this fourth and final episode in our four-part series for January I'm calling Progress Over Perfection. At a time of year when many of us start new things with gusto only to burn out a month or two later, I want to encourage an approach that is realistic, sustainable, and grace-filled. Eating more plant-based is a worthy goal. Taking an intentional approach will set you up best for success. Be sure to hit subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or whatever platform you're listening on so you don't miss the great content to follow in coming months. In addition to solo episodes like this, I have several guest interviews coming up which you won't want to miss. Before diving into today's episode, I want to tell you that I've developed a resource to help you maximize what you get out of this series. And for a limited time, listeners can receive 25% off with the code PROGRESS25 at checkout. That's PROGRESS25. Head over to the store at edenandme.com to check out the Beginner's Guide to Eating Plant-Based. See the show notes for a link. Also, if you would like additional support beyond the podcast and self-directed guide, let's work together. I offer one-on-one coaching, and I'd love to connect with you to see how I can help you build intentional habits toward worthy goals. Reach out to me at edenandme@substack.com for more information. This email address is also in the show notes. Okay, with that, let's dive into our final Progress Over Perfection episode, Part 4. As you strive to eat more plant-based, have grace for yourself and grace for others. As gung-ho as you may be about your plant-based journey, those with whom you regularly share meals may not be on the same page. You may experience some resistance from others. In fact, you may experience some internal resistance too. As excited as you may be to make changes, you may find your taste buds and desires warring within you at times. The goal of this episode is to help you navigate these tricky waters by having grace for both yourself and others along the journey. Let's start with having grace for yourself. Then we'll move outward to relationships with others. Recalling the topic from a couple weeks ago, your pace is your pace, it takes time to develop new habits and for your taste buds to adapt. If you don't make progress as quickly as you had hoped, don't immediately tear yourself down. Perhaps your initial expectations were unrealistic, or perhaps there's something about your approach that you can adapt. Try to identify both, one, whether your initial expectations were reasonable, and two, whether there are any factors that you have control over and can tweak that might enable you to make better progress. At the same time, be willing to accept that struggle is part of the journey. For instance, as motivated as you may be at home, and in the mornings in particular, it can get more difficult to maintain that ease of perspective when you're around others, especially when in social settings involving food, and especially those that occur further along in the day. Not only are such circumstances more challenging, but at that point of the day, we're also more likely to feel tired and less able to bootstrap our way through decisions by sheer willpower. In other words, it's easier to start the day with a plant-based breakfast and pack yourself a plant-based lunch, whereas it can be more difficult to choose a plant-based dinner when out to eat with coworkers or friends after a long day at the office. Not that you should expect your decision-making powers to be weak after 5 p.m. I don't want to set you up for failure, but if you end up caving to eat something you decided not to, or end up eating more of something than you had initially decided to, don't beat yourself up. Have grace for yourself and start afresh tomorrow. But obviously you probably prefer not to cave in the first place, so here are some tips to help you put your own supports in place. When eating at home, make it a rule not to bring certain things into the house. Perhaps you're not giving up meat entirely, but you're choosing only to eat it at restaurants or on special occasions, such as at holiday gatherings. If you don't buy meat and don't bring it home, you won't cook with it. It's pretty simple. But back to a concept we considered in episode 38, be sure to have a plan for what to stock up on instead. Any omission of one food implies an exchange for another. Alternatively, if you're deciding to limit certain items rather than cut them out entirely, then only purchase smaller amounts. Or when you buy larger amounts, pre-portion them and freeze them so that you can easily stick to the decisions that you made previously. And when eating out, scope out your options ahead of time. Pre-decide what you will order or have a couple of options already in mind. This may even include preparing what you might say in response to the questions or comments of others. For example, you might hear, "What? You're not getting the burger? Their burgers are the best. I thought you loved them." Preparing for how to respond to such comments could be just as powerful and important as deciding what to order instead of the beef burger. If you'd like additional tips for what to do when eating out, I dedicated an entire episode to this. See episode 14, linked in the show notes. Briefly, before we move on to having grace for others, let me say a quick word about fiber. This is a highly practical matter that concerns your own individual journey with eating plant-based. When you eat more plants, especially adding in high fiber foods like beans, lentils, and other legumes, you may experience some discomfort, such as minor gastrointestinal distress. It is completely normal to experience some gas and bloating as your gut adapts. Don't assume that you, quote, can't tolerate such foods. If you haven't been eating them and suddenly ramp them up quickly, you're going to feel some repercussions. Just like hitting it hard at the gym when you haven't lifted in months or ever, how our gut interacts with fiber is like a muscle we need to build. And building it up has amazing health benefits. The key here is to go slowly in your increase of fiber. As I noted in episode 31, simply swapping meat for beans, depending on the volume and whether your body is used to beans, might be something to work up to. To be clear, meat contains no fiber. I think some people get confused about this because they confuse muscle fibers with dietary fiber. But dietary fiber, the stuff that is really good for health and feeds our friendly gut microbes, is only found in plants. So if you're regularly eating meat but hardly any beans, swapping out the meat in your dinner for even half a cup of black beans, for example, means you'd be adding 7.5 grams of fiber that you weren't used to eating before. This is where plant-based meat alternatives can come in handy, as well as tofu, which is high in protein but relatively low in fiber. It could be helpful for you as you ramp up and increase slowly your amount of fiber that you consume over time. So bottom line, don't fear fibrous foods. They are amazing for health and tend to have very low carbon footprints. They are a terrific food for you and the planet. Just keep in mind that you need to increase slowly and drink plenty of water throughout the day as you do so to keep things moving. Okay, good talk. Let's move on to having grace for others. Starting with family, if you're feeding more than just yourself on a daily basis, you have family preferences and habits to reckon with. If your family has been used to eating meat for dinner every night of the week, consider how you might ease them into eating more beans and legume products in place of meat. This might look like a combination of approaches. One, you might start with a meatless Monday rather than trying to overhaul too many days of the week. Two, you might swap out some meat for beans or tofu. Try going 50-50 in something like a chili in tacos or a chicken curry dish, doing 50% of the meat and 50% of something like beans or tofu. 3, remember that plant-based meat alternatives can be a helpful transitional food. And there's a huge variety of options available now. It's never been this easy to make a switch. You can go for meatless burger patties, sausages, mince, fillets, and nuggets. Just head to your local grocery store and check out both the plant-based section of your store's butcher area and the freezer section for what options are available. And keep in mind, beans and tofu are super cheap. So even if purchasing plant-based meat alternatives in place of meat seems a bit pricey, remember the affordability of legumes and tofu. Things should end up balancing out if you put both of those together. Plus, the more you move toward legumes and tofu and away from plant-based meat alternatives, if you wish to do so, you'll start saving money. If you face resistance in your family from a spouse or child, have a conversation. Start by listening. Invite them to share their reservations and struggles with you. Seek to understand and show empathy. Then share your own heart and values. See if you can find some common ground and come to a compromise if needed. Ask them, what would make you feel cared for? What would you be willing to do? Also, you, as the person interested in eating more plant-based, make sure you focus on making things that they will enjoy. Rather than making assumptions, ask them, what have been the ways I've made, for example, beans or tofu, that you've enjoyed the most? Or what did you think about the plant-based meat alternatives I've made? Did you like any better than others? While you may be leading the charge for your family in plant-based eating, be sure you're showing them you care about their preferences and are making efforts to make meals that are enjoyable for everyone, as well as being lower in their overall footprint. As you face potential resistance or seek to overcome challenges at home, remember, progress over perfection. Keep that big idea in mind, and have grace for those in your family as you do so. Now, moving outside the home, let's talk about friends. When friends are hosting you, and this applies to extended family as well, be willing to have open, nuanced conversations. In last week's episode, we considered some ways you might broach the topic of your movement toward eating more plant-based. Central to these examples was kindness and clarity in your communication, alongside a willingness to help minimize inconvenience for others. Revisit that discussion for specific talking points that you might want to try. Most of the time, your friends will likely be understanding and willing to accommodate, but that isn't always the case. Others may disagree with you, sometimes intensely, and even if they are willing to make adaptations to a meal for your sake, some might do so begrudgingly. I hope you don't have to face such circumstances, but if you do, be gracious in your communication. Don't shame others for not eating the way that you do. Instead, seek to be winsome and engaging. Invite others into curious conversation. I'm not sure what kinds of friends you have, but we probably all have at least one, if not a handful, who can be a bit cantankerous or even enjoy a bit of controversy. My advice would be, as far as is possible, to avoid getting into fierce debates or arguments about who is, quote, right. By all means, calmly discuss data and research if you'd like, but if things get heated, you can offer to agree to disagree, laugh it off, or find another way to diffuse tension. While I'm all for having meaningful, challenging conversations with friends and family about things that matter, there's no point in adding undue strain to important relationships. Even if you feel convinced that you are speaking with someone who has deluded themselves into believing falsehoods, typically trying to convince them just causes them to double down on their own currently held positions. So if things ever get heated, take a chill pill, smile, and don't take the bait. Overall, core to having grace for others is respecting where they are along their own journeys. When I think back to myself about 7 to 10 years ago, I was on the grass-fed butter, beef, and bone broth bandwagon. I'm sure maybe many of us were. I would not have wanted someone up in my face about how the foods I was eating were, quote, wrong or bad, whatever perspective such claims may have come from, be it health, environment, etc. However, I like to think that I've always been open to seeing reason. I've been willing to change my mind on a lot of things over the years, but rarely because of a combative, pointed claim made directly at me or my way of life or thinking. Instead, what I find winsome is a life faithfully lived. A gracious, non-anxious presence, walking their talk, and inviting curiosity from those looking in on their life. Someone I found particularly winsome in my life was a vegan coworker. She was confident in her choices, but didn't force her decisions on others. She was happy to talk about it when others were curious, but didn't make others feel badly or judged for their current choices. As I noted in episode 18, I don't choose to eat plant-based from the perspective of an ethical vegan. So this coworker's life didn't lead me that way, but she was instrumental in feeding my curiosity about plant-forward ways of eating and why one might choose to eat in such a way. As you consider the relationships in your own life, what might it look like for you to be gracious and winsome on your plant-based journey? And not losing sight of the start of this episode, recall that you need grace as well as those with whom you interact. Thanks so much for joining me on this Progress Over Perfection series for the month of January. I've enjoyed sharing the time with you. And I'd also love to hear how things are going for you. What have you found helpful in this series? On the other hand, what was missing? What do you hope to hear more about in coming weeks? Let me know by sending me an email at edenandme@substack.com. Also, if you've been enjoying this podcast, please consider leaving a review. I'd love to grow the reach of the podcast in 2025, and I need your help to do so. So thank you in advance. If you want recipes, head over to edenandme.com, where you can find a variety of delicious recipes to bring what you're learning into the kitchen. Finally, become an email subscriber on Substack to have new podcast episodes delivered right to your inbox. If you appreciate the work I'm doing and want to support the show, you'll also have the option of becoming a paid subscriber. That's all for now, friends. Until next time, be well. Thanks for listening to Eating for Eden. If you found this episode informative or inspiring, please consider sharing it with a friend. Climate change is an issue we all need to tackle together, so let's invite others to journey along with us as we continue the conversation and start taking action. Until next week, friends, take care.